first thought was of my message, when, thrusting my hand into my breast, a curious sensation of misery came over me as my hand came in contact with a piece of wood, and it seemed that I had been dreaming and the dog had not come. I drew out the flat piece of white wood, but it was not mine. The doctor, probably having no paper, had hit upon the same plan as I. His words were few: "Be on the alert. We shall come some night." I thrust the wooden label beneath the dust of the floor and scraped some more earth over it, and already saw myself at liberty, and in the joy of my heart I uttered a long parrot-like whistle, but it was not answered. I whistled again, but there was no reply, and though I kept on making signals for quite an hour no response came, and the joyousness began to fade out of my breast. Twice over that morning I saw the tall savage who was so diabolically painted and tattooed go by, and once I thought he looked very hard at my hut, but he soon passed out of my sight, leaving me wondering whether he was the chief, from his being so much alone, and the curious way in which all the people seemed to get out of his path. Once or twice he came near enough for me to see him better, and I noticed that he walked with his eyes fixed upon the ground in a dreamy way, full of dignity, and I felt certain now that he must be the king of these people. The next day came, and I saw him again in the midst of quite a crowd, who had borne one of their number into the middle of the enclosure of huts, and this time I saw the tall strange-looking savage go slowly down upon his knees, and soon after rise and motion with his hands, when everyone but the boy fell back. He alone knelt down on one side of what was evidently an injured man. The blacks kept their distance religiously till the painted savage signed to them once more, when they ran forward and four of their number lifted the prostrate figure carefully and carried it into a hut. "I was right," I said to myself with a feeling of satisfaction. "I was right the first time. It is the doctor, and he ought to have come to my help when I was so bad." 2 days, 3 days passed, during which I lay and watched the birds that flitted by, saw the people as they came and went, and from time to time uttered a signal whistle; but this had to be stopped, for on the afternoon of the third day a very tall savage entered hurriedly in the for on the afternoon of the third day a very tall savage entered hurriedly, in company with my guard and half a dozen more, and by signs informed me that if I made signals again my life would be taken. It was very easy to understand, for spears were pointed at me and war clubs tapped me, not very lightly, upon the head. As soon as I was left alone I sat thinking, and before long came to the conclusion that this was probably the reason why I had not heard any signal from Jimmy, who had perhaps been obstinate and consequently had been treated with greater severity. I longed for the night to come when I might have some fresh message from the doctor, but somehow I could not keep awake, anxious as I was, and I was sleeping soundly when a touch woke me with a start. I threw up my hands to catch Gyp by the collar, but to my consternation I touched a hand and arm in the darkness, and there was something so peculiar in the touch, my hand seeming to rest on raised lines of paint, that I turned cold, for I knew that one of the savages was bending over me, and I felt it must mean that my time had come. I should have called out, but a hand was laid over my lips, and an arm pressed my chest as a voice whispered in good English, "Run, escape! You can't stay here." "Who is it?" I whispered back, trembling with excitement. "I know," I added quickly. "You're the tall savage, the doctor." "Yes, yes," he said in a low dreamy tone. "The tall savage. Yes, tall savage." "But you're an Englishman," I panted, with a as a terrible thought, half painful, half filled with hope, flashed through my brain. "Englishman, yes, Englishman. Before I was here. Before I was ill. Come quick. Escape for your life. Go!" "And you?" He was silent, so silent I put out my hands and touched him, to make sure he had not gone, and I found that he was resting his head upon his hands. "Will you go with me to my friends?" I said, trembling still, for the thought that had come to me was gaining strength. "Friends," he said softly. "Friends. Yes, yes, I had friends before I came. Before I came." He said this in a curious dreamy tone, and I forced the idea back. It was impossible, but at the same time my heart leapt for joy. Here was an Englishman dwelling among the savages, a prisoner, or one who had taken up this life willingly, and if he could dwell among them, so could my father, who must be somewhere here. "Tell me," I began, but he laid his hands upon my lips. "Hist! Not a sound," he said. "The people sleep lightly. Come with me." He took my hand in his and led me out boldly past a black who was lying a short distance from my hut, and then right across the broad opening surrounded by the natives' dwellings, and then through a grove of trees to a large hut standing by itself. He pressed my hand hard and led me through the wide opening into what seemed to be a blacker darkness, which did not, however, trouble him, for he stepped out boldly, and then I heard a muttering growl which I recognised directly. "Hush, Jimmy!" I whispered, throwing myself upon my knees. "Don't speak." "Jimmy not a go to speakum," he said softly. "Mass Joe come a top." "Go," said my companion. "Go quick. I want to help. The fever, my head. Help." There was another pause, and on stretching out my hand I found that my guide was pressing his to his forehead once again. "He has lived this savage life so long that he cannot think," I felt, as taking his hand I led him to the opening, through which he passed in silence, and with Jimmy walking close behind he led us between a couple more huts, then for a good hour between tall trees so close together that we threaded our way with difficulty. My companion did not speak, and at last the silence grew so painful that I asked him how long it would be before daybreak. "Hush!" he said. "Listen! They have found out." He finished in an excited way, repeating hastily some native words, before stooping to listen, when to my dismay, plainly enough in the silence of the night, came the angry murmur of voices, and this probably meant pursuit, perhaps capture, and then death. End of chapter 29. How I heard English spoken here.